Good morning, good day, hello. Welcome once again to the KTI Group South Africa YouTube channel. Do like, subscribe, and share with those that may benefit. Today we will be looking at the regulation and governance of AI, artificial intelligence. We will look at why regulation matters, what the different countries and continents are doing in this regard, and most importantly, how Africa is showing up as well to play an important role in the future of artificial intelligence. Do enjoy. All right, so welcome Nombu and welcome Mr. Mohashwa. If you can just pop in the chat and tell us where you are joining us from. And I would also just like to introduce Tebang. Tebang, if you can just say hi to everyone who will be moderating, and she will be attending to the chat while I present.
Good morning, lady and gentlemen.
Yes.
I hope you
Yes.
guys enjoy this webinar. I hope it's going to be insightful and you guys are going to learn a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Tebang. So today is a conversation, is not as much as I do have some slides, it's more of a conversation than a one-way traffic where I will be, just talking. So the intention is for all of us to participate and really shape where AI is going. And I think the important aspect of this as well is this is not a technical conversation. We all interact with AI one way or another, aware, unawares, but either way, it does touch our lives. So this is a platform created for all of us to just ventilate some of the areas of concern, some of issues that affect us, affect our families, affect our children, affect our organizations, and even, our country. So this is really the platform. And the timing of this particular webinar was aligned with the previous AI policy, which was then subsequently withdrawn because the inputs were scheduled. I think the deadline was next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, around there. So this webinar was meant to just solicit some inputs, which will then feed into that. So it's an opportunity to shape and drive policy within our country. So then I thought I'm not necessarily going to change it. We can still, this information is still useful, and an opportunity is still going to present itself, and these inputs will still feed into that particular process. So just as a start, what we will be looking at, so we call this an atlas because we will be looking at regulations across the world. And I think what's important to note here is this is in no way exhaustive, because as we are sitting here, some of these, the information I'll be sharing is already getting updated, new regulations are coming in. So it's really, there's a lot of movement with regards to regulations across the world. So we will just look at some of just the high level aspects and what the move is across the world in terms of the regulation of AI. So we will start off then by just framing the conversation around what are just some of the vocabulary, so that when we speak and when we start looking at what the different countries are doing, we can then understand why is something called a standard and another thing is called a policy, the other one is called a strategy. How do they differ? Then we look at why do we actually need this regulation? Why does it matter? Then we will then go on global and international standards, which covers all the countries or even continents. Then we will then go continent by continent and look at what are those areas what progress that's been made thus far regarding the regulation of AI. And in between, we are going to have pauses where we will then have an open conversation. And as I say, this is for everyone to participate. It's not meant for me to be giving a lecture, but this is just to also, as we are having this conversation, to have a sense of where the world is going. Then we will then wrap up with balancing innovation and regulation. And as we look at how the different countries are approaching this regulations, you will also realize that some countries are pushing innovation, other countries are very strong on regulation, and it's quite a delicate balance of getting the two elements right. And we will then have a look at that, and then we will wrap up. So we should be done in the 2 hours, and even the slides, I won't necessarily talk to each and every point. I will just highlight key points to note from the various countries. So let's just start with, from an overview perspective, with getting the vocabulary right. Okay. Sorry, let me move. I'm trying to move myself so I do not interfere with the slides. There we go. So let's start with the vocabulary. So a regulation, which comes from regulate. To regulate is to control, So regulations are rules that are issued that are binding. So generally, we use a term regulation to apply to a law because a law is fixed, it is binding. But what do people sometimes also use for regulation is also for non-binding items, such as guidelines. So it's sort of almost an all-encompassing, but by its definition, a regulation is something that is mandatory, like it is compulsory, right? So even now we talk about AI regulation, but if you look at some of these other aspects, they are not necessarily regulations because they are not binding, right? So maybe I would then rather talk about governance because governance will look at binding and non-binding. So we'll talk about the governance of AI rather. Then you've got a policy, and a policy is more of a set of priorities and intent, and you'll have policy statements around how you would want to see AI governed within a particular space. That can be within an organization, can be within a country, and so forth. Today, we are focusing more on countries. We're looking at national governance as opposed to individual organizational governance. So when we talk policy, we're looking at policy at government level. We're not looking at policy at an organizational level. However, if you are South African, like now, the minister is working on the national policy. If you are an organization operating in South Africa, you have to align with that. So the national policy cannot say you need to have the following things in place. And then when you go within your organization, you have policies that go against the national. So that's sort of your higher level direction. Then you've got a framework. A framework is effectively a process. It's how you do things, right? And then you've got a principles. Principles are value statements. It's more around what is your aspiration from a value system perspective. And then you've got strategy. The same way that organizations have strategies around how they're going to grow their market share and all of that, countries also have strategies. So AI is now quite, as you know, it's a race to the top. Others say it's actually a race to the bottom. So countries are also trying to say, how do we then use artificial intelligence to take us forward as a country, to grow our economy, to lead in certain sectors and so forth, right? And when we also talk about that balance between innovation and regulation, this also comes into effect. The law, as we say, is binding. There will most typically even be penalties, like any law. If you do not abide by a certain law, there will be consequences. If you steal, you go to prison. It's the same. So if there is a piece of legislation, and you transgress, there will be some form of consequence. A standard is about specification of how things need to be done. So this is more of a quality imperative. It's a sign that says this is of quality. That's why in South Africa, we have South African Bureau of Standards, SABS. So if you buy something and it has that SABS approved, it's a standard. So it says to you, this is of quality, right? So if you have an AI product, there are certain standards that it could sort of, be aligned with. And if you know that this has a certain certification on such and such a standard, that you know that, wow, this is quality, I can trust it. And then guidelines is more of a, suggestion, recommendation. It's not binding, it's not necessarily a standard, but it's mainly based on best practice or leading practice to say, this is what you want to venture into, these are some of the considerations. And a treaty or a convention is where there's a binding agreement. So it's the same as like the law, but it's between two or more countries. Where there will be some agreement. So, for example, in the EU, we'll come to that later, they have the European Convention, and there are even non-EU countries that align with that because they've also set standards and so forth. And based on that, they comply with those particular, guidelines. Then how these fit together, and I've sort of alluded to this as well, is you've got binding law, and that's where your treaty, regulation, and your laws come in. Then you've got standards and guidance. This is your best practice. This is where you say, what I've got is of good, great quality. So this talks more to quality. Then you got to values and direction. And values talks to principles, as I've said, it's a value statement, and then direction. Direction now talks to where you're going as a country. And these are the kind of, this particular part at the bottom is really where as countries you can distinguish yourself from your peers. And even if you are an organization, this is how you separate yourself from others. And in terms of how different countries choose to govern AI, so most of countries, based on just their strategy, they will adopt different things, and also their economic policy and all of that. They will adopt a different strategy to how they govern AI. This, I must say, is and there's also a combination, right? But usually it comes into these four baskets, which is either they go full legal, type of a strategy where they say, we are going to push governance, we're going to have strict laws, and we're going to make sure that people adhere to those laws. And the EU and China are leading examples in this field where, like EU, now we've got the EU AI Act with very, very high penalties that are coming into effect now in August. So they are very strict. We also know from GDPR, which is data protection, that they've issued many, many fines to big companies like your Googles and, the Silicon Valley organizations for privacy violations. And with AI, the penalties are even higher and steeper. So they really do not, they are taking no prisoners here. And then other countries take a position of, we are focusing more on principles, which is a value system and soft laws, like Japan, where they say, you know what, we're not going to impose any penalties, but we want to promote the use of artificial intelligence. So we are just going to provide guardrails, but we're not going to go hard on penalties. And I think once the adoption has improved, then they might now start looking at more punitive measures. And then you also have state-led. So state-led and comprehensive is almost the same. Then you've got where the governance is led by the state, and that is the EU and China. So even when you innovate, you have to innovate within that context. Then you've got the other extreme, like the US is known for this, where it's about innovation. And India also falls in this category. It's more about we want to innovate. And because they are pushing innovation, they're not pushing governance as aggressively. One of the first actions that the US president took was to also relax the governance on AI, because said, as the US, we want to lead. We want dominance in this field. So we are not going to be held back by, quite tight governance, because then the IT industry is not going to be able to do what it needs to do if they now have all these governance hurdles to have to overcome every time. So that's a position that was taken there. So that is, US is a good example where it's more innovation led. So this is generally how countries would look at how to govern AI. So maybe let me then ask you a question. Where do you think we are as South Africa in these 4 baskets? Where do you think? I mean, you can guess. Where do you think what's South Africa's approach? You don't have to know politics to work or whatever, just feeling on the ground. What do you think is there? Yes, Nombu?
Yeah, thank you very much, Portia. Actually, it actually raised a number of questions. As you're talking, I'm writing there to say, looking at this picture, you realize that some countries would adopt 1 or 2 models. For example, the EU will still have the comprehensive and binding state-led, and then the UK or US, there is principles of soft law and innovation-led. So I'm asking myself now, where do we fit in as a country? Because with the first one, I'm not sure whether there have been any changes, but I know South Africa was trying to follow the EU AI Act. So whether they were going to follow that holistically or they were going to adopt certain aspects of that. Yeah, that's me. I was just thinking loud. Thank you. I don't know. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Any other takers? What's your guess? What's your guess? How do others feel? Mr. Mohasho, what's your guess?
On my side, I think South Africa is pushing principles and soft law. I think we are on that category, South Africa.
Yeah. I think we'll see now with the new policy when it comes out next year, what it's going to be. So we're all quite anxious and can't wait to see what they're going to cook up. So that's pretty much effectively how most countries look. And I also wonder from a ministry perspective if they even consider these type of buckets to say where do we really want to position ourselves. And I think what also becomes important also from a country perspective is having that higher level strategy. I mean, we used to have the National Development Plan, and I'm not sure how well we do against that. Like China had a 50-year strategy, and based on that 50-year, it took them from where they used to be to the dominant force that they are today. And so everything that then we do from an AI perspective still needs to feed into the national plan to say how do we want to position ourselves as a country in the world? What is our signature? For example, you have India that everybody knows that's where everybody does their offshoring, that's their niche. So what then becomes our niche, and how does then AI come in to help us in that, in that field? So if we look at the different regulations, policies, etc., these are I would say, a bucket of 6 areas where most countries focus. It's an issue of ethics, and I think ethics has also been quite a big thing around AI. Then the safety and security. And I think what's important on the safety and security is to remember that wars used to be fought by people with guns or knives or swords or shield. What did Shaka use? Spear, all of that. That's how wars used to be fought. But now, our war is moving into the digital era. Right now, I would say we are in a hybrid type of a situation where we fight our wars through physical means still, but the virtual, the digital war is already there, right? I mean, with a good virus, you can ground a whole country, right? So as we now start moving, as the war starts moving into the digital arena, then AI becomes, quite important, and the safety and security becomes critical. Then there's also the issue around privacy and data. And you will see also when you go through a lot of the countries, they are using the privacy laws that we have, like Bopia in our example. They are using that as a foundation for how they govern artificial intelligence because without having that privacy, there's no point what you put on top of that because you first have to secure the privacy, then you can build the other aspects. And then there's issue around transparency where artificial intelligence is used, disclosures and so forth, and accountability. When we did the AI Basics webinar, I did address also issues around accountability and human oversight. Human oversight is to make sure, talks to human in the loop, making sure that there's always human oversight. And I still say this for me remains the biggest risk because human beings, we are naturally lazy. We are naturally lazy. So if they say, Portia, police this thing, make sure when it gets to step 4, you check it before it moves to step 6, which means I'm step number 5. Guess what? I'll just pick and say, approve, and then, yeah. So this is a key area. But I think this, you'll see when we get to the regulations that it falls in one or two of these baskets, sometimes maybe all of them, but all of them is really just regulating and focusing on the same areas. Then, why does regulation matter? Why does it even matter for us to regulate? Let me hear from you.
Okay, maybe I can come in there, Posh. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
for me, regulation is important, especially when we use AI tools for 2 reasons. The issue of ethics as well as privacy. I had said 2, now I've got to go to the third one. So it's privacy and also bias. Those for me are the critical things that
Yeah.
we need regulations because of those 3. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yes, Flo, why must we control this? Is there a need for us to control?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Portia. Yes, I think it needs to be regulated without safeguarding reasons. It can avoid spread of misinformation and so things like to threaten human rights, disrupt labor markets, etc. So regulation is important for this AI.
Yeah. That is so true. That is so true, Flo. We need, it's exactly that. So it's important that we have some control over it, like with anything, right? I mean, I can't imagine of anything that we don't necessarily control in the world, So this is just, one of those things that we need to control. So, bias and discrimination. So you see, you guys have the memo. You've got the crib notes, bias and information. Because if you don't control, if you don't regulate, then you're going to have the bias perpetuated, discrimination. We talked about privacy, safety. We talked about that accountability, misinformation flow, as you have said, and then again, concentration of power. So the concentration of power actually goes with the bias and discrimination because you can also use this technology to perpetuate certain biases within society. And when we did the basics, I gave an example that if you look at media, for example, if you can imagine yourself being in the West and somebody says Africa, and you go to images, what exactly are you going to see? You are not going to see Sandton. You are going to see the shacks, right? So AI has also that potential to perpetuate those stereotypes, right? Because it will just feed what is in the internet and turn that into reality. So it's important to also then have those guardrails so that we have a balanced picture. It doesn't mean we don't have shacks, we do, but then we also have Sandton, we also have Camps Bay, we also have beautiful Mpumalanga. We've got all these other things, but if you just go on the popular narrative, you are going to see the worst part of our country or any country for that matter, or even Africa, So yeah, so that's really why we need that. And good regulation then gives us trust. Remember, I also said it's about instilling trust to say what we have does comply with the certain regulations. It gives us safe. It also strengthens our legal instruments, and it also brings fairness to the markets. So it's about trust at the end of the day. So let us then, before we get to the actual regulations, let's have an open conversation. And these are just to guide. You don't have to even talk to the questions, but it's about who should be setting the rules. Should we be looking at speed, as in getting the controls in quickly, or should we look at safety, right? And also speed, not only in terms of the controls, but in terms of the innovation. Are we the ones who want to lead in Africa, become the AI hub for Africa quickly, or are we going to say, no, let's put in the guardrails before we run, but then in the process, somebody might overtake us. Should we have one global rule book, or is it okay that we have our own South African one, and then Zimbabwe will have its own, and UK will have its own, or maybe should we be looking at something global? And would we trust the regulation? Do we feel that the regulations are even worth the paper that they are written on? And are there lines that we should not cross? And this is really just to guide, but what are some of those things that when you think of AI regulation are top of mind? What keeps you awake at night? What is like your worst case scenario when you imagine it? What is that worst case scenario for you? So let us go around the room to just check. I'm going to just ask in the order that I see you. Tshepa, what keeps you awake at night about AI, and who do you think should solve? What is the problem and who do you think should solve it?
Can they hear us? Like, can they hear us? Because they know what we want, they know what we are discussing. It's scary.
Yes, yes. And who do you think should solve that problem?
The government, obviously.
Okay, so that's one for Minister Malatsi to address, right? Yeah, no, I must say, hey, you know what, they do hear us, eh? So yes, Sepang, can they hear us? They are listening all that. You know what? It's not even, it's just a technology of all these gadgets. That's why you can just instruct the conversational AI, because it's listening. It will know. I mean, how does Siri know that when I say, hey, Siri, it must respond? Because it's always listening and looking out for you to say that. You see, so yes, they do hear us. So other than being heard, what's the other? Is that the only concern, or do you have something else that's also worrying you, Tshepan?
That's my only concern for now.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to confirm your greatest fear. They do hear you, okay?
Ish, 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 ish.
Yeah, they do hear us. Yeah. Florence, what's keeping you awake at night?
Security.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, elaborate further on that one.
Yeah, I'm always thinking about how secure AI can be, and obviously it needs all these leaders like governments, global bodies, and the companies,
Yeah, yeah,
all of
yeah.
them, not only one.
Yeah. So that's a serious one, and I think you've seen also on the earlier slides, Flo, where safety and security is top of mind. So it's something that's already on the agenda of government leaders to say, how is this going to affect our security? How is this going to affect the safety of our citizens? And with cybersecurity, we have now AI propagating malware. So It's yeah, because it's like a tool in the hands. They always say it's like a hammer. You can use it with a nail and you build a nice house, or you can do other things with a hammer. It's the same thing, but depends on which hands it's sitting.
Yes.
So the same way that we can use AI to improve their lives, to improve health, and do all these wonderful things, it can, in the wrong hands, it can do a lot of harm.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So other than security, is that your only one?
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, okay. All right, all right. Mr. Mohashwa, what is keeping you awake at night?
Mine is same as flaws, man. Before she spoke about security, it's same as hers actually. Like now I got nothing except like being secured. Like are we really, really? Oh, and then you emphasized on that thing. So it's same as Florence.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, security. And maybe let me tap into, maybe explore Tsepangs a little bit. So why are you worried that they hear you? I'm trying to see if it's also linked to security or if it's something else. Why don't you want them to hear you? What's worrying you about the fact that they hear you?
It's not that I'm like, okay, I am worried, né? But like when I go to the search bar, maybe I'm talking about what ice cream is there available, and then already my search bar is talking about ice creams. I'm like, what? What? Maybe I'm just thinking aloud, and I'm like,
It's the cookies, it's the cookies, on all these websites and whatever. That's what it is. So yeah, okay. So it's privacy. So for you, your issue is privacy, actually.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
So you are saying, no, where's my privacy now? Yes, that's
yes,
okay. So that's the heart of your problem. Okay.
yes.
And then Flo and Mr. Mkashwa is security. Nombu, what's keeping you awake at night?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So privacy for me is one of the key things, but linking it to the responsible use of AI, that
Yeah.
majority of the people don't know or understand how to use the tools responsibly. I'll give you an example. Um, at the moment, what people are putting out there, they don't understand the impact, right? So, for
Yeah.
example, as parents, we take nice pictures of our kids. I know this is scary. Nice pictures of our kids, we put them out there. But imagine your child, I mean, they're still young, but when they turn 18, before they turn 18, they now decide on their sexuality, right? Maybe they were girls, now they want to transform to become women or transgender, that kind of thing. So, and what you've already put out there as a parent to say, now I have a girl child, right? Later on, when they find themselves, now they are a boy child, right? And maybe it's something that they didn't want to be out there, and
Yeah.
they did want to hide their privacy or their past. Now they emerge as Nombu being a man, and but someone will say, hey, hang on, here's something. This was what happened when you were still young. That for me is very, very scary.
Yeah.
And that the use of such tools, parents don't know. When we take the pictures of our kids, what we put out there, it will catch up with them. Not catch up with them. It will have serious social impact on their lives.
Yeah.
So the responsible use, the thing is, how do we train people to understand that you cannot use this thing irresponsibly? That's number
Yeah.
one. The second one for me is, again, now going back to the government, when we try to talk about regulation, especially in South Africa, is if we're talking about regulating and putting all this, but we are still using foreign technologies, to what extent do we also then say that is if we don't even follow the innovation-led governance model to say, let's also be innovative in Africa, like India, so that you're able to control the sovereignty, the data. So for me, those are the critical things to say, even if we're regulating it, but we're not looking at innovation. So how are we going to ensure that data sovereignty becomes critical, embedded in the technology, so that whoever brings the technology in our country, we say, yes, we will use the technology, your technology. However, when it comes to our data, this is how we need to secure that. Yeah, so that's two things: security of data as well as the privacy and the responsible use. Thank you.
Thank you. So privacy and security seems to be getting a trophy here, okay? So I must note, we will come back to that as we progress. So security and privacy. Yeah. Okay. Now then, let's see. Let's move right along. So now we're going to start broad and come narrow. So we're going to look at globally, what are the standards, which means pretty much any country can use these standards. And then we're going to start going continent by continent. So let's look at the global and international standards. So we have the OECD AI principles, and this again it has these 5 value-based principles. Remember, we talked about principles are more values driven. And you will find that most of the regulations or governance will almost always factor these ones in. And it is actually the first intergovernmental AI standard. And those principles involve, so this is tied also to the UN. So this is inclusive growth and well-being, which means AI should not harm individual, and that's why it's human-centered, and then transparency, explainability. Explainability, you will recall from the AI basics, is about, remember we had input, processing, output. A lot of AI models, there's a data set that is an input. That's why we talked about garbage in, garbage out. And then it does something, which is a question mark, which is called a black box, because we don't really know what it does. And then we've got an output. So explainability is about ability to understand what is in that black box. Because remember, we said whatever AI does, it is not a human, so it does not have, there's no legal consequence for an AI. The legal consequence will always be with a person. So if I have a company and I use AI and there's an adverse outcome, I am accountable as an organization, or I'm accountable as an individual if I'm using it in my individual capacity. So which means explainable AI explains this part, because I can't just not know what AI is doing if I'm accountable for the output. So that is quite critical. And that's why even on the basics, I indicated that this is a growing field, because a lot of companies and people are getting in trouble because of the black box, because the output is adverse, but they cannot explain how the AI did that, but they are still held accountable all the same. And then there has to be security and accountability, of course. So this is one of the global standards. Again, remember, principles are not binding. They are not binding, it's more best practice, which means if I have a company in South Africa, I can choose, let's say out of those 5, I can say I'm just taking 3. The rest, I'm not going to bother for now. If I'm a country, I can say I'm going to take 2, etc. It is not a binding, right? However, because it's such good work and a first standard that really applies across the board, you will find that most of the national strategies have used this as a foundation, but it is not binding. And then we also have UNESCO, again linked to the UN. So they also have ethics. So and I think if I look at how a lot of countries started with AI, they started with ethics, because I think it was more about protecting people from AI. But I think you can now start seeing that we're moving away from just focusing on ethics, and people are starting to see a strategic advantage to using AI, as opposed to this is something that we need to protect ourselves from. This is something that we can use to solve our country's problems and even grow our economy. So there is that shift that we are starting to see. So this particular one, there are member states. It has 10 principles and policy areas. So I did not put those down because all of this, they are readily available on the internet. I just summarize and keep it at high level. If you have interest in any of these, you can just Google it. It will give you the actual document. So again, this is recommendations, non-binding. So you see that there's also a bit of democracy applied here to say this is what we recommend in terms of the ethics, but it is not something that is enforceable. And again here in 2023, G7 also approved the AI process. They call it an AI process, but it is really and this is a technical type of standard, because it also looks at some of the considerations for developers. So this is one of the AI process. That's why it's called process, because it talks to the development, and it's a playbook for those who then develop this technology. But again, it is also a non-binding. It's a soft law. So it is, if you remember, we had law, etc. So this will almost be in the area of a treaty, almost, because sort of agreement amongst countries, a gentleman's agreement type of a thing. But obviously it's things, it has those aspects that if the countries incorporate, it's just going to improve their AI posture. Then we've got ISO, which is the International Standard Organization, and the 42,000 is the AI standard. So this is where you can also get certified. Again, remember SABS, if you buy a product SABS approved, then you know this is quality. So this also is a quality standard. Then we know that if this is an AI product and it's ISO certified, then you know this is good quality, that you know that the proper controls and so forth has been taken into account. NIST is again, NIST is a security framework. So NIST therefore is very focused on security, and we talk to that as well. And so their model is more based on risk, because it's a security framework. So they've got those 4 elements, which is the govern, map, measure, and manage. So that's the focus of NIST, is to also manage the risks that are brought about by AI. So when we're talking about AI propagated cyber attacks, NIST aims to address such issues, amongst other things, because it does not only just look at AI. NIST also, you know, is a cybersecurity framework overall, but now they have the specific one for AI, because it introduces new risks. So that is what NIST does. So just remember, these are just global standards, and none of them are binding. There's ISO, UNESCO, OECD, none of them are binding, but they are good standards and they are foundational. So it's always a good idea when you start to develop something for yourself, you use them as a base, because they are all-encompassing and they are country agnostic, they are technology agnostic. So always a very good place to start. And that's why they are referenced in so many other regulations. And then we've got the European Convention that we talked about, which is more of a treaty where a number of countries came together and they put together rules around AI. But this one, though, as you can see, it is binding because it's a treaty. Remember, a treaty is formal. So this is a treaty. However, we still have members who are not part of the EU who also subscribe to it. And I think there's also some advantage to belonging to that because you're going to get all the resources that come out of that. You're going to have benefit of the research that's been conducted and so forth, but it is binding, right? So if they make a policy directive that AI, for example, will not have bias, it means in my country, I can't have bias because I've signed a treaty to say I'm going to uphold such and such a principle. So that is the European Convention. So this one, even though, so it's global standard because it's more than one country, but it's not global as in all countries around the world are compelled. It's only those that are part of that convention. It applies to those that are part of the convention. So now let's go now on a tour. Let's start now with Europe. And I just need to mention these are not in any particular order, but I strategically left Africa for last because that's where we want to camp a little bit. So this is Europe. And now when we start talking to the individual countries and continents, I want you to remember the models where it's law, where we had those 4 buckets, where it's about regulation, innovation-led soft law, and also, secondly, the focus areas where we had safety and security, bias and discrimination, and so forth, because we're going to start seeing a combination of those throughout as we look at how the countries are regulating. So the EU AI Act, this is very, very comprehensive. I did touch on this when we did basics as well at high level, and this is sort of now the de facto standard. And that's also where I said, I hope our government working on the policy will tap into this. A lot of work has gone into this. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And if you look at all these governance documents, you will see that really there's no need to start from a South African perspective. We've got strategies, we've got policies, we've got laws, we've got all of those already available, done by other countries. We just have to take from there and say what works for us in South Africa and just create something. We don't have to start from a clean slate. So this is a very strict and very comprehensive piece of legislation, and it's got this 4-tier risk model. And at the top, which is unacceptable, that's where you also get maximum penalties, like social scoring and so forth. So this is very strict, and the penalties are coming into effect now, August. So from 1st of August, it's going to be fun and games in the EU, because what I know about the EU, they'll always want to make an example of someone. They did the same with GDPR on the privacy. GDPR is a POPIA equivalent for the EU. They did the same. They've slapped big companies with massive fines. And I can tell you, they are already even probably ready already to issue a fine. They've probably already identified delinquents. They're just waiting for the 2nd of August. And I can tell you, I anticipate that 1 or 2 are going to get a very interesting fine. So that's the EU model. And this has really just been the journey from where it started up to where we are. And as you can see, from the 2nd of August, there will be the fines, and they will be doing market surveillance. But that's why I say I think they've been doing that market surveillance for a while. They're just waiting for this date so they can start writing the fine, issuing the fines. So it's going to be very interesting there in the EU. And so these are, if you look at the tier of risks, you can also, when you are at that unacceptable prohibited practices, 7% of your global turnover, that's like 10%. That's really, I mean, if I have a turnover of 1 million, that's almost 100,000. So if you can just put that into context. So yeah, that's significant. And that's why I say, I think they are going to set an example. And then this one is, they also have general purpose rules for foundational models. And this is more on the development side, again, for deployments and so forth. These are technical rules. So Where you will start seeing the advancement is if you look at the AI Act, you can say it's more generic around the country, but they also now have technical specifications. So if you compare this now with where we are, we don't even have a policy. So you can already see how far we still have to go to a stage where we also now need to move beyond just policy and legislation and start going deeper inside the models and setting standards of how these machines get built, because currently there's no control over that. I can build anything. Any person can build anything. There's absolutely no control. But the EU has now moved further to say we're now also going to tell people how they deploy, how they develop it, and all of that. So there's progress there. They are pushing very hard. And also, as you can see, GDPR, which is the privacy, this is really just a comparison to say how do they differ. But as I say, it's important that the two work together. And you will see also from a GDPR perspective that the fines were up to 4%, right? Now the fines are up to 7%. So they are not playing here. EU is not playing when it comes to abuse coming from AI. So I'll be very watching with interest this August. I'm anticipating something will happen very soon, either August or September. I have a feeling something is going to happen. So I'll be watching. Because I mean, some companies you can see that something is not kosher here, so it's going to be interesting. Now, while we are still in Europe, then we've got the UK. The UK is very light. Again, that's soft law, to say they are pushing innovation. And I must say, and I'm saying this also, maybe it's my own ignorance. I have not seen boldness coming out of the UK as far as the AI game is concerned. And maybe it might be maybe the type of media that I read. Maybe it's not necessarily drawing on UK information. But I do not see them being very aggressive with AI compared to the UAE, and we'll come to that. But they are again taking that approach to say we're going to push innovation. And what they're also doing differently is they also drive it per sector. Because UK, one of its strengths is the financial sector, like the banking sector. That's where they are strong. So they are driving it per sector, and then they will most likely, so they are sort of taking a bottom-up approach as opposed to having heavy legislation and then, having to filter it down. So that's sort of their approach. They are very relaxed about it and just letting the sector sort of shape where it goes, which I think in a way, it has its advantages, because if you think of when you said a top-down approach, you might stifle certain industries. But if you get the industries to sort of shape, then it means by the time you get to the pinnacle, you are not going to stifle your economic growth because your strong sectors will remain strong. But again, it really remains to be seen. And again, they are pushing principles more than, the hard laws and penalties and so forth. And then beyond Brussels, and so remember we did the EU and then we did the UK. Then you will remember that this is Brexit. This is talking to Brexit now, because UK used to be part of the EU. So which means when we said Europe, would just say EU, effectively it would mean the same thing. But now we see the EU part. When we talk Europe, you've got the EU, and you see the EU is going heavy on governance, right? They're going dictatorial. They're like dictating to say, this is how we're going to do it. And then you go to UK and say, no, we're going to take it easy. We're going to take it easy. So what then happens is, if you look at the non-EU, they still join in through the convention. So they are not part of the bigger, because if you are non-EU, then you are not necessarily, that you are not bounded by the act, but they're still part of the convention. And remember, convention is binding. So there's still somehow a link there. But if we look then at the EU countries, they move fast because they have the resources and they sort of can leverage also of each other. right? But the disadvantage is the fact that obviously it's a little bit more rigid for them there. But Europe is moving. Europe is moving. Europe is moving, and we'll come to the other continents. But as you can see, most of it is very strict on the law. Then let's come to North America. Then here is again innovation and dominance. That's the strategy. This is really just the strategy and the challenge here. And there's a lot of challenges now that's sitting with US in particular because of their stance on dominance, because they not only just want to dominate the actual technology, they want to dominate the ecosystem, like the chips and all these, they want to own the whole value chain. And that's why there's all sorts of challenges within the country and fallout with some of the other countries because, they don't want to use chips from other countries. And so there's all sorts of things that are happening in the US with regards to the AI governance. But the important thing here is America wants to lead. The US wants to lead and it wants to dominate. If you look at today, let's check who is using which tool. Let me go back to the participants. Tepang, what AI tool do you normally use? Like your default, your de facto one, the one that you just quickly just use. What do you use?
It's usually Safari or ChatGPT.
Okay, yes. Flo, what are you using? Flo?
I'm muted.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, I think Google.
Okay, yeah, because it's got its own, yeah. Okay, all right. And then Mr. Mokasha, which one are you using? Your go-to one?
My go-to one is a Claude, but usually, it's Claude actually.
Okay, so you use Claude. Okay. Nombu, which one is your go-to?
Well, when I'm on my mobile, I use Meta. Then then there's Copilot, Perplexity. Yeah, mostly Europe from the US. Yeah.
Yeah, so you see, so I can tell you my go-to one is Copilot, and you know why? Because I'm always using Microsoft Office, and it's there. So I have others that I use, but I only go when this one is not working. If I'm struggling to get one, then I say, let me go to this other one. But so I use Copilot a lot. Then there's DeepSeek and these others. But bottom line, Copilot is the one, my go-to one, right? So what is the moral of the story here? We are all using US first, all of us in this call. So do you see the dominance? That strategy is working. You see, and that's why I have DeepSeek, because it's a Chinese one, because I said, no, let me get a different flavor. Let me get a different flavor. But I must say, I go to DeepSeek if I don't find what I want in the other ones. And also Apple, because I have Apple devices. I also use the Apple one if I'm not in office, in the Microsoft Office. Yeah, Nombo, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Bush. I'm actually laughing because what the US is doing is they're actually imposing these things on us. Like you say with Copilot, every time you open Microsoft, if you're on 365, I mean, we've already
Yes,
migrated.
yeah.
You don't have a choice. You don't have an option. And if you're on WhatsApp, Meta is there. You can't just say, I don't want this, but because we are using these tools and they're already imposing them on us.
Yeah.
So that for me is one of the things that we're experiencing. Thanks.
Yeah. And it's not by accident, hey? It's a strategy. It's a strategy, because then what happens? You get used to it. And then if they remove it, guess what's gonna happen? I'm gonna go looking for it and say, where's that Copilot? You know, because I can tell you now, when I'm busy with my slides and I don't get that Copilot icon there, I'm going to look for it and say, what's wrong with my settings? What's wrong with my settings? I want it, because as I'm working, I give it work to do on the side and I continue, you know. That is the dominance that we are talking about, you know. So, and I think what also US has as an advantage is Silicon Valley. I mean, all the IT companies are there, your Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, you name them, they are there. And I think what President Trump was trying to do is, I mean, if we have Silicon Valley, we cannot afford to have another country dominating when we are pretty much running technology in the world. So, and for them to end up having Silicon Valley, again, is another strategy. You know, Silicon Valley does not just happen. You know, so as South Africa, we also need to ask ourselves, how do we create our own Silicon Valley? And we don't have to be another Microsoft or another Apple. We can come with a completely different value proposition, and that becomes our niche, because we need to say, what is that thing that is going to separate us from the rest of the world, and that is our niche, and that we can use to grow our economy. So that's the US. And then here, and then this is again on the US and some of their internal challenges. These slides are available to share, so I don't want to be going through the slides. I would rather have us conversate. So this is also just some of the internal challenges with pushbacks within the country. So it's as much as from an outside perspective, they seem to be winning the race, but internally there's also a lot of pushback as well. And then, so if we look at as I say, the Colorado, there's also a legal case as well, where there's pushback on some of these regulations. So that's currently in the courts as we speak. So then we also have hiring algorithms, but remember, from an EU perspective, those are some of the prohibited uses of AI. So there's also a slight discrepancy between how America is approaching this compared to the EU, because, you know, the EU is more, if I can say, left aligned, whereas America now is more on the right, and hence you start seeing some of these aspects. But then again, there has to be transparency as well. Okay, and then Canada. Yeah, so Canada is still very strong on the privacy side, which is like our POPIA equivalent. But in terms of really proper AI governance, they are lagging behind. And I think Canada, because now they have a bit of a strained relationship with the US, it's regrettable, because they could sort of tap into that knowledge base to also further their own governance muscle. But yeah, it's just one of those political issues. Mexico, they now have a strategy, so that's where they are, but they don't have an actual law, but they at least have a strategy. You have to start somewhere, right? So at least they do have that, and they do also have fines, but again, this is more on the data protection side, and they also have quite steep fines as well. So on the data protection, they are moving very, very well along. And then when we go to Asia, here, China is almost, it's sort of the EU type of an approach, very strict, and you have to operate within that legal framework. And what they have done, though, in China is they're already now strengthening their agent governance. Remember, when we did the basics, we talked about they now have the first autonomous AI agent. And that's why they're strengthening governance in that regard, because they want to push that other technology, but you can't push it outside a proper legal framework. So that's the big thing that's coming out of China. And then Japan, as I said, they're playing nice. They are promoting AI, but they are not strict on the rules. But they obviously have it's non-binding for now. I think over time they are going to be stringent, but for now I think they're just trying to stimulate innovation and economic growth through artificial intelligence. That's just my personal opinion. Then South Korea, and they now have a law. So South Korea is a small country, but they actually have a proper AI law, which is sort of the same. So I think what they typically did is they leveraged the EU Act and then they just customize it. And that's why I say, even with us, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just build on what's already in place. And South Korea also focuses on key sectors like your health, like high impact sectors. And then Singapore also has a mini Silicon Valley there. So most of these countries, your Meta and all of those, they've got some regional offices there. They've got offices there. So their focus is on a framework, which is the how. Remember, a framework is a process. So this is more around the how part as opposed to more the law. And I think it's probably influenced by the presence of those US companies there to say, give us room to breathe, but at least let's just make sure that we do have some form of governance in place. That's Singapore, because it's really Singapore is establishing itself as an innovation hub then in Asia as well. And then India and other regions, again, innovation, push for innovation. So we'll see that other than EU and China, there's really a push for innovation. And I'll say Japan is somewhere in between, where they still have an act, but they very soft on the hand, but that's sort of where most countries are going. And then when we come to Latin America, Brazil, also, so Brazil is actually quite very good when it comes to matters of governance, so they do have, but they also then very strong on their data protection. So if you look at this, you can see this is data, this is protection. You don't have to know the language, you can guess. So they have, so they are very strong on data protection, and their AI also operates within that context of data protection as well. So remember when we went to the two problems that we made reference to, it's the security, data protection. So, and you see data protection, almost every slide says something about data protection, because the two will always go together, right? So Brazil is very much on there. So I think I want to pause a little bit on Brazil, and I'm gonna put Nombu on the spot because she has Brazilian blood. Nombu, what's your view and sense around Brazil and how they are regulating AI and just the approach? What has your experience been, or what's your view? What's your opinion?
Yeah, thank you, Posh. Yeah, you actually are absolutely right that Brazil, especially when it comes to data protection, is one of the key things. Like you mentioned, I happened to be at that university in Rio de Janeiro, and what was interesting is that university, it's a law university and it's a think tank to the government. So every legislations that comes out, is backed up by research from that. So that has become very, very interesting. And one of the things maybe I just need to mention, which I mentioned earlier, was that there is now even a law preventing parents from posting their kids' pictures online, So I also actually got that from them when they this law was passed, I think, in 2024, 2020. Yeah. Now they're very strong with that. And one of the things they're saying, yes, we don't mind using foreign technology. However, when it comes to data sovereignty and privacy is very, very critical. Yeah, that's that in brief.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So Brazil, they actually quite strict on these things. It's actually one, can you share? I think it's one of the countries to ban Twitter. Hey, Nombu?
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, they banned and Twitter. Remember, it was a big thing.
I don't know if it's back or what's happening. I just remember reading that article because no Twitter, let's just say X, because I think since Twitter changed to X, it morphed into something else.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. No, thanks for that. And then Chile, there we go. And so what is interesting for me with Chile, right, is the fact that they had now, and I'm going to be watching this with keen interest, what we call neuro rights. We really live in a different world now. So they have the first constitutional protection for the human mind. Did you ever think we'll see that day? Because with technologies like Neuralink, the Elon Musk Neuralink, where there'll be chips in people's, can we imagine that now we need to protect the mind from technology? This is like science fiction, eh? So this is one that I'm going to turn into a hobby, because this is just too fascinating for me. I'm quite keen and excited, and I'm going to do a lot of reading on this one. I just find it so fascinating, I must say. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, so that's Chile on that one. And then Argentina and Uruguay, they have strategies. So the focus is more on the strategy. So I think when I observe these countries, I think most of them, they start with a strategy. Then they start saying, okay, so to implement this strategy, what are we going to need? Then that's when the policies, the acts, and all these other things come in. And when we get to us, I will also just explain where we are as well with regards to that. So these are also countries that are also, I would say, still early ages for them as well, right? But on the data protection, they have something. But remember, privacy has been around for a while. AI, at least from a general use perspective, is new, even though we know the technology has been around for a while. And that's why now the regulation and the governance bodies are playing catch up. So for some countries, we still see that they are still slightly behind, and others have actually progressed, because you also need resources. You need to tap into very scarce skills, very expensive scarce skills, to be able to put some of these frameworks and governance structures in place. So Argentina does have a national plan, and still in terms of AI specific, early days yet, but they are working on that. There's a proposal. Uruguay, they are part of the European Convention, so that is going to also assist them to fast track, because then they'll be able to tap into all of that knowledge base. And then if you look at the wider area, it's the same issues, where there's issues like Colombia, they focus on ethics. Peru, they have a strategy. So you'll see the smaller countries, they are more on a strategy, trying to sort out the strategy, and then the rest will come later. But I suspect that, like we've seen on the other side, it's just if they have a strategy, then join the convention, and that will help you if you can. That is, and again, as I said, some countries are non-EU, so even non-EU countries can come in, but I would expect that it's maybe comes at a cost. I don't know. Then we've got Oceania and the Middle East, Australia. Australia is doing great work. I know that now they've also started restricting access for children for technology, social media, and so forth. So they're doing some work in that regard. So they're playing a very strong role in terms of the ethical aspects and also online safety. So they're doing a lot in terms of online safety, but they're still working towards a proper military setup, an arrangement. They have safety commissioners and so forth, and they also now have a AI safety institute as well. So Australia is also, making its mark, doing well. And then New Zealand, New Zealand is a very liberal country. So you will see that because they're so liberal, they are also very relaxed in also how they look at AI. And I think they've also applied sort of a light touch approach to this. And there's also a challenge there where deepfakes and all of that is growing because of the lack of control. So here is where you see where there's no control, what can actually happen, right? And so they have issues around fake news, misinformation, etc., because they just don't have the guardrails. So there's I think a country that needs to start stepping up as well. And then UAE, they actually the first country to appoint a minister of AI. Okay, so they are doing very well, and they are strategizing themselves to actually lead. That is, they want to be leading. So they are actually in direct competition with the US on this. Because the US is saying we want to dominate, and UAE is saying no, by 2031, which is just tomorrow, by the way, it's 5 years from now, they want to be leading. So yeah, we shall see. We'll be watching with interest. Saudi Arabia, again here, they have a data authority that's established. They have a strategy, and they're also targeting to be in the top 15 by 2030. So everybody wants, that's why I say it's a race to the top. It's a race to the top. And this year is designated Year of Artificial Intelligence. But this, the reason I say sometimes it's a race to the bottom is because sometimes to get to the top, people don't necessarily do it the right way. Then it's more you're racing to the bottom because, yeah, it does catch up eventually, but they are also trying to make their mark as well. Now, last but definitely not least, this beautiful continent of ours, here is what's happening here at home. So we have an AU continental AI strategy. So we have a strategy. Remember I was saying the strategy, and there's also, so we already part of this as South Africa. So there's a continental strategy which has those 5 pillars, and it's a 5-year strategy, and there's a midterm review next year. So and I'm going to talk to the governance index that's also stemming out of this. So already from a country perspective, we already have this. We have a strategy, and so we just now need to implement, right? And then Egypt is doing very, very well. They even have a bilateral arrangement with Rwanda. So Egypt is also part of that and part of Smart Africa. So Egypt is really, really doing good work. And I'll come back to Egypt as well. What is interesting with Rwanda, though, is they are positioning themselves as a regional AI hub. And this is where now I'm jealous as a South African. I'm jealous because I want us to lead everything, okay? Maybe I'm that competitive. I want South Africa to lead everything. So I'm thinking we must lead the continent. We must, if there's anything to be led, it must be led by us. So yeah, but that's where Rwanda is how it's positioning themselves. And as I said, they're already having this partnership with Egypt. So they are they are pushing as well. And then Mauritius, they've got this FAIR by design, which is really about governance by design for your AI models, which is fair accountability, responsibility, etc. It's all of those good things we were talking about earlier. And they also have a dedicated AI unit as well. So Mauritius is also doing quite well. And then back home, wait, going back, there we go. So back home here, we had POPIA, which is a protection of personal information. Then we have the cyber crimes, which is about reporting, and then electronic communication as well. Then we've got other, like your employment equity and so forth. These also feed into what would then become our legislation, because we have to take all these elements into account. So we've got the Department of Digital Technologies, we've got the Information Regulator, we've got ICASA and so forth. So these are the institutions. And now we had a policy framework, and this year, April, we had a draft policy which was then withdrawn. Yeah, that was a bit of a embarrassing situation with fake citations, but they are redrafting, and we are hoping that next year it will come out. But I must say, I'm very, very optimistic and excited about what's going to come out of the process. I'm very, very excited. So coming back to that AU strategy, AI strategy, there's been a governance index that was conducted looking at these 8 areas. So this is where we find ourselves now. And they're looking at different countries, and then they map them against policy and strategy, which means how well are we doing against policy and strategy? What is the regulatory framework, institutional capacity? Do we even have capacity to do this? Ethics, infrastructure, talent, investment, and implementation. Now, here we are. This is the results. So we are number 2. Can we just clap hands? Let's give ourselves a round of applause. We are behind, but let's give ourselves a round of applause. I don't see the hands. Are you guys clapping? Where's the emoji hands? Maybe I can't see because I'm sharing. But at least let's be proud. We are number 2. And as you can see, Egypt is leading. And that's why when I was looking at Rwanda, I said I'm a bit jealous. I'm just exposing my bias now. Because now Rwanda is partnering with Egypt. Egypt is leading the continent. So you can see that this is just going to, give them that boost that they need. And they are number 4 now. And yeah, so when we get this thing run again, I just wonder where we'll be sitting. But this is where we are at as South Africa. So maybe before we continue, I just want to check, are you surprised by where we're ranking here? Or is it sort of expected? I would have liked that we are number 1, but I know that we don't have basics in place yet. So I didn't exactly expect us to be number 1, but is this what you expected to see, or are you surprised?
I'm not surprised, and I think we are doing well, and we can even do more than this. We are not far to number 1.
Yeah.
But even if we are still number 2, I think it's still fine, because Egypt plus Rwanda is going to be more strengthened. And maybe you can share if there is a possibility to partner with another country. Do you think there is that possibility?
No, we can. I mean, there's nothing stopping us. It's more about, as I say, I think for me, it's about the bigger strategy. I'm not sure what the minister has in mind around how we move forward, but we have good relationships with all African countries, at least to the best of my knowledge. So there's nothing really that should prevent us from moving.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more about what would strategically makes sense for South Africa, but we can partner. Even Egypt, I don't, that's why I say because some of these things are also political, it's not like it might maybe make sense that we partner with a particular country, but maybe politically we might not want to play with them. We want to play with somebody else, because maybe we don't agree on other things. So we don't want to then have to deal with them on this particular aspect. So yeah, so it's maybe something that the government need to think about. Yeah, Nombu?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's quite interesting that number two. I'm not surprised, but the issue for us is the implementation. So when I look at this chart, especially when it comes to collaboration, I think South Africa is best placed if it can partner with Kenya, especially on the infrastructure side. So if you look at the infra category, so South Africa is sitting at 55 and Kenya at 50 and Rwanda 39. And if you combine the two, it would actually even closer to what that collaboration between Egypt and Rwanda. Because I know with Kenya also, when it comes to being the next African Silicon hub, they are already there. It might not be AI only, but when it comes to infrastructure development and also tech development, they are quite there. That's where that maybe South Africa can position itself.
Okay, all right. No, thanks for those insights. Yeah, so that's where we are as Africa and specifically South Africa. So we do have quite a bit to go. And as we see, Egypt for now is really leading us, but we can still come back. And I think we want to come back with a bang next year. I can feel it. I think we will definitely come back with a bang. And I think this readiness index and review next year is also something that I will be watching very closely. I will see if there's even an opportunity to attend. I'm very keen to see where we are going. I think as Africans, we shouldn't be spectators. I think the African continent, there's so much potential here. We don't have to be spectators and having these tools, and as you said, just shove down our throats. We can be contenders. I like the UAE saying we are going to dominate by 2031. And I would like to see that type of tone also coming from Africa and saying, bring it on. We also putting our number in the hat, So I'm hoping that that's sort of the language that we'll start hearing coming from our leaders. And then we are starting to move to a close, and it goes back to innovation and governance. You can have when you move fast, you can have breakthroughs in industries, medicine, health, whatever you can think of. You also stimulate startups when you have speed, because startups do not have time or cannot afford to be caught up by bureaucracy, right? And you can also generate jobs. You can stimulate the economy, and some of the rules are based on yesterday's technology. And I think for me, that's always my worry when we look at governance of AI is I still see that the approach is almost always the same as how we approach traditional technology, and this is a different type of technology. I don't think we are even yet to understand its impact on humanity, but we want to regulate it as if we understand it. And as a result, all we are doing is we are just even making the gap between the regulation and the innovation even wider. So, but having said that, we also need the guardrails, right? To protect from what we spoke about earlier, security, bias, discrimination. We need accountability, because sometimes the AI can cause harm. We need to instill public confidence, and we need to level the playing field as well. So we can't also just have been the wild, wild west where we are all just cowboys and we just do what we want. We need to strike a balance. So we always then need to also just look at how do we best then balance these two, and it's about having risk-based tiers, which means if something's low risk, listen, let's give people room and your startups can play there. Let's create regulatory sandboxes, same story where let's create a platform where people can safely play and deploy these models. And once these things are tested, they can then be released in the wild, so to speak, and also having proportionate rules. So we cannot have a one size fits all, because how are you going to regulate a company with 100,000 employees and systems and infrastructure, as opposed to a company with 5 people, operating in a garage? It cannot be the same, so that's that. And then also look at co-regulation. And I think tapping into what is already there, as opposed to having to rebuild, and obviously setting standards, and also tapping into what is already there, like your ISO standards and so forth. Then, if we just summarize what we've been looking at, you will see that Korea, South Korea, EU, and China are the ones where we've got binding regulations. Everywhere else, either the regulations, the governance is pending, in progress, or it's more guidance, like countries like Japan. And yeah, and then just some of the things to look at is, I also mentioned the issue around AI agents. And that's why I said, how we govern AI cannot be the same, because it's evolving. And you'll recall when we did basics, I said, this is an evolving science. This thing is changing. As we are sitting, it's already changing. Somebody needs to change something. So now agents have taken center stage. There are a lot of governance issues with agents. I will not even be surprised if that fine that's going to come, the exemplary one where they're going to set an example, it might be linked to agents. I actually will not be surprised. Let's just watch and see. And again, let's use the standards, which are then rules that can just help us to unify how we employ this. And then also look at some of the UAE and how they're investing and getting themselves ready for dominance. So I'm quite interested around how that is going to unfold. I'll be watching that with interest. And I think as South Africa and Africa as a coordinate, it's an opportunity to do what the EU is doing, where we use our collective muscle, our collective knowledge base, our collective resources to take Africa to the next level, as opposed to having every country doing its own thing. We don't even have the financial resources to duplicate that type of work, but we can partner, work together, and take our position as well, and contend for dominance as well. That's just my view there. So bottom line is, there's one world, many rule books. I think as we're going through, you saw so many rule books. Everybody's sort of doing their own things, their own rules. Others are more focusing on ethics. Others are focusing on privacy. Others are focusing on this. Some are focusing on stimulating innovation, but everybody's approaching it differently. But bottom line is, AI is here to stay, and we need to find the most effective way to govern it for the benefit of not just our respective countries, but I think for humanity at large. So our last discussion is, so after having said that, having gone through all of that, how do you think, should we be pushing innovation, or should we be pushing regulation as South Africa? What is your take? Not everybody at the same time. What do you think?
Innovation.
Innovation. Okay. Okay. Mr. Mhashwa, what should we push? Innovation or
Innovation,
innovation? Nombu,
yes,
innovation.
yes.
Let's see.
I take innovation.
Okay. Tepang, let's see you.
I
What must
agree.
we,
I agree.
yeah?
I agree. I agree.
Okay, so the people say innovation first. We'll sort out the regulation after. We'll work with it as we go along, right? Okay. No, that there's no right or wrong answer there. It's about, as I say, what is the strategy of the country, and I think we can use innovation. I think we regulate. Yeah, we are just that country. We have so many laws, and they can, yeah. And especially when you look at startups, we are killing, suffocating startups with all these regulations. So we can definitely use a bit of innovation. Yes, Nombu?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just thinking innovation because for now, other countries have been ahead. They've already started. So with our innovation, we can use then lessons learned from those
Okay.
innovation initiatives, and then also then put
Yeah.
laws into place. Unlike
Yeah.
with them, they started with with innovation, and then the laws that came later. So for us, I think we are good to go, especially when it comes to but use lessons learned as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the lessons learned is actually a good point. We don't have to make the mistakes ourselves. Let's learn from the other people's mistakes. Yeah. So I think that partnership and collaboration is going to be so critical in how we move forward as a country. It's going to be quite critical. So yeah. Okay, so thank you. This is the end of the presentation, and this is also the end of my story. So I'm going to pause here and just take maybe closing comments or questions, and then we are good to go. I'm still honoring your time for finishing at 12. Any going to stop sharing. Here we go. Let's close that. Yes. Okay. So thank you really so much for spending this Saturday morning with me, and in this cold weather. So thank you so much. Any other comments, closing remarks? Yes, Nombu?
Yeah, thank you very much for sure. That was very insightful. Initially I had 2 hours, but I think can we push it for another hour? It's very insightful. So it has triggered a couple of things. Just two things for me, at the moment, that's why I say in South Africa we are well positioned because we can learn from what other countries are doing. At the moment, especially Americans, they know they're very good at suing each other. So even now in court, there is a case against an AI agent and a person.
Yeah.
So that's going to be very interesting to see the outcomes of that. And then also we find that there are other companies that are suing AI tools. For example, ChatGPT is being sued by other, I'm just trying to open this very quickly. Yeah, ChatGPT, for example, is being sued by New York Times, Ziff, whatever, Daily News, because I'm not sure what what the issues are, but I think for South Africa, or maybe what's your view regarding when we legislate, and we also need to take into consideration the legal aspect, the rights of people, and then from your perspective, what do you think? The fact that these things are happening in front of our eyes, yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I think most of these cases, they fall in two categories. One is copyright infringement. Because I remember there was also, I don't know if it's the same one you're making reference to on ChatGPT. So there's a copyright infringement one. Because what happens is the data set could have actually protected information and they just use it. So that's the number one. So which means in terms of our policy, and that's why I say you don't just need governance at macro level, you need to also go down to technical like when we've seen there are standards around deployments and so forth, because that's where you need to make sure that you're not violating any form of copyright in how you build your models. And then the second area, other than copyright, is the issue of that black box, right? Remember the black box that I talked about, where AI will come to an outcome, you don't know how it came to an outcome. And then when they sue you, you don't know because the AI did it. So we now have to go further and understand how actually that model is built so that when there's a particular outcome, we can explain how it got there, right? So that's also the other thing that I think is creating a lot of problems for people. So I think, so most of them I've just seen they are in those type of categories. And then again, obviously, it could also be a real bias issue, right? And then again, you need to then demonstrate how you build a model to prevent bias if you are sued. Okay, so that's also another area. So it's just common. Then when it comes to agents, yeah, I think we're gonna see so many of those because an agent just does, yeah, it can even hallucinate an action and just does the opposite of what you told it to do. So yeah, agents, we need to move with caution there, because if I just think of possible litigation coming out of agents, like the list for me is endless. So we just need to be very careful with agents. I think it's where we said we need a sandbox. That's where we need to just put them in a sandbox environment and really try to figure them out. And then we will gradually, release them to the wild. But for now, they are very high risk from a pure regulation perspective.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nombo. Flo, anything on your side?
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to learn more and more. Yeah, for me, I'm just thinking, how can this AI innovation help young people, youth, to solve local problems, not even national problems, local problems like building businesses where they are and be able to get something or even creating jobs.
Yeah. So actually your question is an answer in itself, Flo.
Okay.
Your question is actually an answer at the same time, because once we get young people to understand the technology and what it can do, because, for example, these webinars, that's why I make them accessible, and they're free and they're basic, like we don't use technical language because it's supposed to be for everyone, right? Because once they start understanding the technology, how it works, the risks and etc., it's like learning how to drive a car. Once you know how to drive a car, you can go on the road and do your own thing, right? So that is what is needed. And I know there are so many programs, but I'm not sure exactly where there's a communication breakdown. Because once the young people understand this, then they can go. I mean, AI can even write code. They can create apps. You just look in your own neighborhood and say, this is the problem. And then you just go and create an app with AI to solve that problem, and then before you know it, it's a business and all of that. Because I'm also quite an advocate for small business and startups. I believe they are the only solution to unemployment problems that we have. Big companies cannot absorb. If anything, they are shedding employees. So the only solution we have is small business, right? So through the use of this technology, there's so much that the youngsters can do, but I still think there's a communication breakdown, because I know there's a lot of initiatives, but somehow it's not getting to where it's meant to. So I think that's maybe something that we need to reflect on, to say, how do we make these things accessible? Like that basics webinar is something that's on YouTube. You can just share it with anyone. To just say, this is not as scary as you think. It's just basic technology. Just understand how it works, and then go and start using it, start playing with it, So that I think, Flo, for me, is the challenge, that people who really need to get this information are not necessarily receiving it. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
mm.
So that's that.
It's something that
So,
maybe needs to be
mm,
addressed at the school level, like high school level.
yeah, absolutely. So I think that there has to be some form of partnership with, I think it's like sort of an adopted school where you just go to a specific school and say, I'm going to target this one. And because that's also how word of mouth works. Then you deal with this school, and then the next thing it spreads, and then then the next thing it's all over the country. But because we have to start somewhere. But I think it's actually a great idea to say start with the school and work from there.
No,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time, Portia. It's really appreciated.
No, I also appreciate you spending the morning with me. Thank you so much, and your contribution. The intention was for this to be interactive, and it was. So I'm excited, and so we look forward to future webinars. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it. So just an advert now for the next one, because we do this monthly. So the next one is going to be a very interesting one. It's going to be AI and your faith. So we are going to look at AI pastors, AI worship leaders, AI sermons. We'll be looking at that. So look out follow us on social media. The adverts will go out soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Okay, bye.
Bye.